The rain had started before dawn, turning downtown Chicago into a blur of silver reflections and cold white headlights against black pavement. By the time Evelyn Carter stepped into the 32nd floor law office overlooking Lake Michigan, the entire city looked distant, muted behind sheets of winter rain sliding across the glass walls. Everything inside the conference room felt expensive in the quietest way possible. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Soft leather chairs. Crystal water glasses untouched beside stacks of legal documents waiting beneath warm recessed lighting. The kind of room designed for people who made decisions without emotion. Daniel Mercer sat across from her in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, one hand resting near his phone while the divorce papers lay open between them. He looked calm. Too calm. As if the end of their marriage had already happened months ago somewhere inside him, and today was only paperwork catching up to reality. Evelyn held the silver pen carefully between her fingers, though she could barely feel them anymore. Outside, thunder rolled low above the lake. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The attorney quietly adjusted his glasses and slid the final signature page toward her. Daniel signed first. Fast. Controlled. Detached. Then he leaned back in his chair without looking at her. His phone vibrated softly against the table. A message appeared across the screen before it dimmed again. Vanessa, dinner tonight still on? Evelyn's eyes lingered on the message only briefly before she lowered them again. Her expression never changed. That was what hurt the most about the woman she had become. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Just exhaustion so deep it no longer had energy to fight. Daniel finally spoke, his voice smooth and low beneath the muted rain against the windows. This is better for both of us. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment after he said it. There was a time she would have begged him to explain what changed. A time she would have cried in front of him. Asked him to stay. Asked what she did wrong. But now she only nodded once, almost politely. Then she signed her name. The sound of pen against paper felt strangely loud inside the room. Daniel exhaled softly, as if relieved the difficult part was over. But Evelyn realized something cold and irreversible in that moment. The difficult part had only existed for her. He reached for his phone again before the ink even dried. That small movement said more than cruelty ever could. She stood slowly, smoothing the sleeve of her cream wool coat with composed hands. No dramatic exit. No accusation. The attorney offered quiet condolences she barely heard. By the time the elevator doors closed around her downstairs, the pressure in her chest felt almost numb. Outside, Chicago moved around her without noticing anything had ended. Black umbrellas drifted past glowing storefronts. Snow mixed with rain beneath streetlights. A black luxury SUV sped through a flooded intersection too quickly, splashing icy water across the marble sidewalk near her heels before disappearing into traffic. Evelyn did not react. She slipped her wedding ring from her finger and closed it tightly inside her coat pocket instead. The metal still felt warm from her skin. She drove north alone through freezing rain while soft piano music played faintly through the speakers. Downtown lights stretched endlessly across wet highways, blurred gold against darkness. Her hand stayed steady on the steering wheel even as memories pressed against her mind like ghosts trapped beneath glass. Daniel laughing at political dinners without ever really looking at her. Empty penthouse mornings. Half-finished conversations. Nights where silence sat between them heavier than words. She realized with terrifying clarity that their marriage had not died today. It had died slowly while she kept pretending love could survive neglect. Snow thickened across the highway. Headlights shimmered through the storm ahead. Then suddenly, white light exploded across the windshield. Tires screamed somewhere far away. Metal twisted. Everything disappeared into violent brightness and sound before collapsing into absolute silence. And then Evelyn Carter opened her eyes. Her breath caught sharply in her throat as morning sunlight spilled across silk sheets beneath her trembling hands. Warm light flooded a Manhattan penthouse she had not lived in for years. For one impossible second, she thought she was still dreaming. Then she saw them resting untouched on the marble kitchen island beyond the bedroom doorway. Cream-colored wedding invitations tied with gold ribbon. Her gaze dropped slowly toward her left hand. The engagement ring was back. Evelyn stared at the engagement ring for so long that the morning sunlight slowly shifted across the marble floor beneath her bare feet. Her breathing remained uneven as fragments of memory crashed through her mind with terrifying clarity. The law office in Chicago. The rain against glass windows. Daniel signing the divorce papers without looking at her. The white explosion of headlights across frozen pavement. She pressed trembling fingers against her temple and forced herself to look around the penthouse again. Everything was exactly the way it had been before the wedding. Fresh white orchids arranged near the dining room windows. Bridal magazines stacked carelessly beside the couch. Her cream-colored coat hanging untouched near the entrance. Somewhere beyond the skyline, Manhattan moved through another cold February morning completely unaware that reality itself had split apart inside this apartment. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Evelyn flinched instinctively before opening the door to find Clara, her wedding planner, carrying garment bags and coffee cups with hurried energy. "Thank God you are awake," Clara said while stepping inside. "Tonight is going to be impossible without you. Senator Holloway already confirmed attendance and Daniel wants everything perfect." Evelyn felt the room tilt slightly at the mention of his name. Tonight. The engagement gala. 3 months before the wedding. 3 months before everything collapsed. She accepted the coffee carefully, grounding herself against the warmth of the paper cup. "What time does it start?" she asked quietly. Clara paused for half a second, studying her face. 7. "Are you feeling all right?" Evelyn looked toward the massive windows overlooking Central Park. Snow drifted softly between the buildings, blurring the city into pale silver and muted gold. "Just tired," she answered. The words tasted strange now because she suddenly understood how long she had been tired. By evening, Manhattan glittered beneath freezing rain and chandelier light. The engagement gala occupied the grand ballroom of the Astoria Crown Hotel, where politicians, investors, and old money families drifted beneath gold ceilings carrying champagne flutes and polished smiles. Evelyn stood near Daniel while photographers called their names from the entrance staircase. His hand rested lightly against her back for appearances, but the distance between them already felt permanent. He spent most of the evening speaking with donors and campaign advisors while Evelyn remained beside him like part of the architecture. Beautiful. Silent. Replaceable. "Governor Hayes may stop by later," Daniel said distractedly while adjusting his cufflinks. "Try not to disappear tonight." Evelyn looked at him calmly. "Of course." He did not notice the difference in her voice. He did not notice much anymore. Music swelled softly through the ballroom while waiters moved between wealthy guests carrying silver trays filled with champagne. Across the room, Evelyn suddenly became aware of someone watching her. Not in the hungry social way she was accustomed to. Something quieter. Sharper. Her eyes lifted instinctively toward a tall man standing beside the ballroom balcony beneath dim amber light. Adrian Whitmore. She recognized him immediately from magazines and business headlines. Boston billionaire. Investment strategist. Ruthlessly private. He stood with one hand inside his pocket while powerful men spoke around him, but his attention remained fixed entirely on her. Not her dress. Not her social value. Her. Before Evelyn could look away, Daniel appeared beside her again. "There you are," he murmured while scanning the room over her shoulder. "Come meet the Whitmore group." They crossed the ballroom together through waves of conversation and camera flashes until Daniel finally stopped near Adrian. "Whitmore," Daniel said smoothly. "Good to see you." Adrian nodded once before his gaze shifted toward Evelyn. Up close, his presence felt colder than the room itself. Controlled. Observant. Like a man who missed nothing even when silent. Daniel introduced her automatically, almost mechanically. "My fiancée, Evelyn Carter." Adrian held her gaze for one long second too long. Then he said quietly, "You look exhausted." The noise of the ballroom seemed to disappear for half a heartbeat. Evelyn blinked slowly, caught completely off guard by the simplicity of the observation. Nobody had asked if she was all right in years. Not really. Daniel gave a short laugh beside her. Wedding planning. But Adrian never looked away from Evelyn while he answered. I do not think that is all. Before she could respond, a waiter collided suddenly into another guest nearby. A champagne tray tipped sideways. Crystal shattered sharply against marble as pale gold liquid splashed directly toward Evelyn's dress. Gasps spread through the surrounding crowd. Cameras instantly lifted. But before the first flash erupted, Adrian stepped forward without hesitation and removed his suit jacket in one smooth motion, shielding Evelyn from the photographers while the ballroom staff scrambled to clean the floor. The movement was calm. Effortless. Protective in a way that startled her more than the accident itself. Daniel froze beside them for half a second too long before finally saying something to the staff. Adrian handed Evelyn the dark cashmere jacket quietly. Careful, he said. His voice remained low enough that only she could hear it. The warmth of the fabric settled around her shoulders while camera flashes continued bursting across the ballroom. For the first time all evening, she no longer felt invisible. Much later that night, Evelyn stood alone beside the penthouse windows while Manhattan shimmered below through rain-streaked glass. The city lights reflected softly across the engagement ring still resting on her hand. Behind her, the apartment remained silent except for the distant hum of traffic far below. Then the memories returned again. Faster this time. Harsher. Empty hospital corridors washed in cold fluorescent light. Unanswered messages glowing against darkness. Daniel standing near a window with his back turned while she cried quietly behind him. And then one final image surfaced through the fog of memory with terrifying clarity. A funeral service she had never witnessed herself. Black umbrellas beneath winter rain. White roses. Adrian Whitmore standing alone in the distance beside her grave. For the next several days, Evelyn moved through Manhattan like someone learning how to exist inside her own life again. Every room carried two versions of memory now. The past she remembered and the future no one else knew was waiting for them. Some mornings she woke before sunrise with her pulse racing, convinced she could still hear the violent scream of tires against frozen pavement. Other mornings she stood silently beside the penthouse windows watching snow drift between steel towers while trying to understand why Adrian Whitmore had stood at her funeral in the life she lost. That question followed her everywhere. It lingered beneath conversations. Beneath silence. Beneath every glance she accidentally remembered from the gala. By the end of February, the city settled into a rhythm of gray skies and freezing rain. Political season intensified around Daniel as donor meetings, charity events, and strategy dinners consumed nearly every evening. Evelyn attended because she always had. Because people expected her beside him. Because society often mistook quiet endurance for loyalty. On a Thursday morning, she arrived at the Mercer Foundation headquarters overlooking the Charles River in Boston for what Daniel described as a simple committee briefing. The conference room gleamed with polished walnut walls and floor-to-ceiling windows fogged softly from the cold outside. Staff members moved quickly around long marble tables arranging folders and coffee service while donors filtered into the room wearing dark cashmere coats still dusted with snow. Evelyn removed her gloves slowly, sensing tension before anyone spoke. Daniel stood near the head of the table speaking with campaign advisors when he finally glanced toward her. "There you are," he said. "We have some restructuring on the Aspen fundraiser committee." Evelyn took her seat quietly while assistants distributed updated schedules. Then she saw the name printed beside hers. Adrian Whitmore. Co-chair. Her stomach tightened almost instantly. Daniel noticed the flicker in her expression and gave a controlled smile that never reached his eyes. "Looks like you will be spending time together." Before Evelyn could answer, another voice entered calmly from behind her. "I do not mind." The room shifted subtly as Adrian Whitmore stepped toward the table beneath the muted winter light pouring through the windows. His dark wool coat rested over one arm while snow melted slowly across his shoulders. Conversations lowered instinctively around him. Powerful men acknowledged him differently than they acknowledged everyone else. Carefully. Respectfully. Adrian greeted the committee with brief professionalism before taking the seat directly beside Evelyn. Not across from her. Beside her. Close enough that she became aware of the clean scent of cedar and cold winter air lingering from his coat. Daniel's jaw tightened almost invisibly before the meeting continued. For the next hour, discussions about donor strategy and political optics filled the room, but Evelyn struggled to concentrate. Every time she spoke, Adrian listened with complete attention while others interrupted or glanced toward their phones. When she suggested redirecting a portion of the Aspen fundraiser toward restoration grants for small historic communities damaged by winter storms, Adrian looked toward her immediately. "That is the first useful idea anyone has offered this morning," he said calmly. Several executives laughed politely, though Daniel remained silent beside the projector screen. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the documents in front of her, unsettled less by the compliment itself than by the fact that someone had actually listened. 2 days later, heavy snowstorms swept across the Northeast as the committee boarded a private jet bound for Aspen. The cabin glowed softly beneath amber overhead lighting while Manhattan disappeared beneath clouds outside the windows. Daniel spent most of the flight reviewing campaign notes with advisors near the front of the aircraft, barely acknowledging Evelyn except to ask whether she had approved the seating chart for the donor retreat dinner. Adrian sat across the aisle reading financial reports quietly, his expression unreadable beneath the dim cabin lights. Somewhere over Pennsylvania, turbulence hit hard enough to shake crystal glasses across the drink trays. Several passengers gasped as the aircraft dropped suddenly through rough air. Evelyn's fingers locked instinctively around the armrest. Her breathing shortened without warning. The memory came back too fast. White headlights. Ice. Impact. She stared forward rigidly while the plane trembled again beneath heavy clouds. Then, without speaking, Adrian shifted slightly in his seat and rested his hand beside hers on the center armrest. Not touching. Just there. Close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from him against the cold panic spreading through her chest. Her breathing slowed gradually. One breath. Then another. Neither of them spoke while the storm continued around the aircraft. But when Evelyn finally glanced toward him, Adrian was already watching her carefully, like he understood far more than she had ever explained. By the time they reached Aspen, night had fallen across the mountains. Snow covered the roads in thick silver layers while black SUVs carried donors and political families toward the private lodge high above the valley. The resort itself looked almost unreal beneath the storm. Warm golden windows glowing against endless white wilderness. Pine trees bending beneath heavy snow. Firelight flickering through enormous stone walls. But sometime after midnight, the power failed briefly during the storm. The lodge fell into darkness except for scattered emergency lights and candle flames trembling along the hallways. Evelyn stood alone near one of the upper corridors trying to steady herself against another wave of memory when a sudden crack of thunder echoed through the mountains outside. Instinctively, she grabbed the railing too quickly. Her sleeve slipped back slightly beneath the candlelight, exposing faint scars along her wrist left from shattered glass in the accident she still remembered too vividly. Before she could cover them again, Adrian appeared at the far end of the hallway holding a flashlight. His eyes lowered briefly toward her wrist. Then back to her face. He said nothing. Not one word. The silence somehow felt gentler than pity would have. A few moments later, staff members restored partial power to the lodge while guests resumed nervous laughter downstairs. But after that night, Evelyn noticed something impossible to ignore. Adrian Whitmore never allowed her to walk alone through the snow again. Snow continued falling across Aspen long after midnight, covering the mountains in a silence so complete it almost felt unreal. The donor retreat carried on beneath golden chandeliers and roaring stone fireplaces while powerful families drifted through the lodge wrapped in cashmere and polished conversation. Yet for Evelyn, everything had begun separating into smaller moments now. The things people did not say. The glances they avoided. The invisible weight inside rooms full of expensive smiles. She noticed all of it differently after dying once. Especially him. Adrian Whitmore moved through the lodge with the same controlled stillness he carried everywhere else. He rarely raised his voice. Rarely lingered unnecessarily near anyone. But somehow Evelyn always sensed him nearby before she saw him. Sometimes it was only the subtle shift of attention around a room when he entered. Other times it was quieter than that. A feeling. Like being watched carefully by someone who understood silence too well. 2 nights after the storm, the retreat hosted a private investor dinner inside the upper ballroom overlooking the mountains. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed endless white snowfall beneath a dark blue sky while candlelight reflected softly against polished marble floors. A string quartet played low music near the terrace doors as waiters carried crystal glasses through clusters of politicians and donors discussing campaign strategy. Evelyn stood near the balcony railing wearing a midnight blue gown Clara had insisted would photograph well beside Daniel. The irony almost made her smile. Daniel had spent most of the evening moving between investors without once asking if she needed anything. She no longer expected him to. That realization should have hurt more than it did. Instead, she mostly felt tired. The cold from outside seeped faintly through the glass behind her while she watched snow spiral through the darkness beyond the lodge lights. You disappear in crowded rooms. Adrian's voice came quietly beside her. Evelyn turned slightly. He stood near enough for candlelight to catch the sharp lines of his expression, though his posture remained relaxed, one hand resting loosely in his pocket. Maybe crowded rooms are exhausting, she answered softly. Adrian studied her for a moment too long before looking toward the ballroom around them. When was the last time someone took care of you? The question landed harder than she expected. Evelyn opened her mouth slightly, but no answer came immediately. Her chest tightened beneath the weight of memories she rarely allowed herself to examine directly. Hospital lights. Lonely mornings. Crying silently beside a man who no longer noticed. For one dangerous second, she almost told him the truth. Then footsteps approached across the marble floor behind them. Daniel's campaign manager interrupted with forced brightness about seating arrangements and donor introductions. The moment vanished instantly. Adrian stepped back without visible frustration, his expression returning to calm professionalism so quickly it almost made Evelyn wonder if she imagined the softness in his voice at all. But later that night, she realized she had never answered his question because she genuinely did not remember the last time anyone had taken care of her. The following morning brought sharp sunlight across fresh snow and renewed activity throughout the retreat. Media teams arrived unexpectedly after rumors spread that several high-profile donors might announce public endorsements during the weekend. Evelyn discovered the gossip accidentally while walking through the lower corridor outside the conference rooms. 2 staff members stood near the service entrance whispering urgently beside stacks of camera equipment. Whitmore shut it down himself, one of them murmured. Apparently he threatened to pull funding if they pushed the Mercer fiancée story. Evelyn slowed slightly without letting them notice she heard. Why? The other whispered back. No idea. But the interview team packed up 20 minutes ago. The women hurried away before Evelyn could process the strange ache settling beneath her ribs. She had not even known a media interview existed. No one warned her there had been plans to publicly question her relationship beside Daniel for campaign headlines. And yet Adrian had stopped it quietly without telling her. No announcement. No dramatic confrontation. Just protection handled silently somewhere behind closed doors. The realization followed her through the rest of the day like warmth beneath winter air. That evening, the retreat hosted a charity auction inside the grand ballroom. Gold chandeliers glowed overhead while wealthy guests gathered around raised platforms displaying artwork, historical artifacts, and luxury travel packages donated for political fundraising. Snow still fell outside the towering windows, softening the mountains into silver shadows. Evelyn stood beside one of the bidding tables reviewing a restoration proposal for a damaged historic theater in Vermont when an older donor began joking loudly about politicians spending more money on chandeliers than public schools. The absurdity of it caught her unexpectedly off guard. A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Real laughter. Soft. Brief. Honest. The sound disappeared almost immediately into the ballroom noise, but Adrian heard it. Across the room, his conversation paused mid-sentence. He looked directly at her with an expression Evelyn could not fully understand. Not surprise exactly. Something quieter. Like witnessing sunlight after years of winter. He did not smile. That somehow made it more intimate. Daniel noticed the look too. Evelyn saw the shift in his face from across the ballroom before he quickly turned back toward his investors. But for the first time since waking inside this rewritten life, she realized something irreversible had already started changing around them. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just beneath the surface. And Adrian Whitmore was watching every part of it happen. March arrived slowly along the east coast, carrying warmer winds through Charleston and melting the last traces of winter from the old stone streets near the harbor. For the first time since waking inside her rewritten life, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar beginning to return beneath the exhaustion. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter. Direction. The historic restoration project she had once abandoned after becoming engaged to Daniel now occupied most of her days. In her previous life, she had surrendered pieces of herself so gradually she barely noticed it happening. Her architecture work became smaller. Her ambitions softer. Her world reduced to supporting someone else's rise. But this time, she refused to disappear before the wedding even happened. The restoration site stood along the Charleston waterfront inside a century-old luxury hotel damaged by storms and neglect. Dust floated through shafts of morning light while workers moved carefully beneath exposed beams and faded gold molding waiting to be restored. Evelyn walked through the unfinished ballroom carrying rolled blueprints beneath one arm, her cream trench coat catching softly against the old hardwood floors. Outside, seagulls drifted above the harbor while warm Atlantic wind rattled the tall windows facing the water. She stopped near the center of the ballroom, studying the ceiling details she intended to preserve instead of replace. Most investors preferred modern renovations because they were cheaper and photographed better. Evelyn preferred history. She believed beautiful things deserved patience. You kept the original archways. Adrian's voice broke gently through the silence behind her. Evelyn turned too quickly, genuinely startled to see him there. He stood near the ballroom entrance in a dark navy coat with sunlight falling across one side of his face from the harbor windows behind him. "What are you doing in Charleston?" she asked softly. Adrian stepped farther inside, his gaze moving slowly across the exposed chandeliers and unfinished marble columns. "Your contractor invited several potential investors to review the restoration." He looked toward her again. "I was curious." Evelyn lowered the blueprints onto a nearby table while workers continued quietly around them. Somehow his presence changed the atmosphere of the room without effort. Everything felt more focused when he entered spaces. More intentional. She walked him through the project slowly, explaining preservation plans for the ballroom, rooftop suites, and waterfront terrace overlooking the marina. Adrian listened with the same unsettling attention he always gave her, never interrupting, never pretending interest he did not feel. When she finished describing the final phase of restoration, silence settled briefly between them beneath the soft echo of construction sounds. Adrian studied the blueprints for a long moment before speaking. "You built something beautiful while surviving people who could not see you." The words landed quietly but deeply enough to steal her breath for a second. Evelyn looked away immediately toward the harbor windows because she suddenly could not trust her expression. No one had ever described her life so accurately with so few words. She felt his gaze remain on her even after silence returned. Later that evening, the project hosted a waterfront fundraising reception beneath strings of warm lights draped across the outdoor terrace overlooking Charleston Harbor. Wealthy investors and preservation donors gathered beside white linen tables while jazz music drifted softly through the spring air. Most conversations initially moved around Evelyn instead of toward her. She recognized the pattern well. Men discussing investments while barely acknowledging the woman who designed the entire project. Daniel had spent years teaching her how invisible elite society could make women feel even while smiling directly at them. Evelyn remained composed beside the architectural display boards while several investors spoke dismissively about budget priorities and commercial redesigns. Then Adrian arrived. Conversations shifted almost immediately as guests turned toward him with practiced attention. He greeted donors politely before walking directly toward Evelyn instead of the financial committee waiting nearby. "You designed all of this?" one older investor suddenly asked her after noticing Adrian studying the blueprints beside her. Before Evelyn could answer, Adrian spoke calmly. "The entire restoration exists because of her." The atmosphere changed instantly. Questions began redirecting toward Evelyn instead of around her. Investors who barely acknowledged her 10 minutes earlier now asked detailed opinions about preservation strategy, historical valuation, and luxury development planning. Daniel had always introduced her as support. Adrian introduced her as authority. The difference settled somewhere deep inside her chest with dangerous warmth. Across the terrace, cameras flashed against harbor lights while wealthy guests watched the interaction carefully. Evelyn noticed several women whispering quietly behind champagne glasses while Adrian continued asking for her professional opinion publicly without hesitation. By the end of the evening, she realized something even more unsettling than his attention itself. She trusted him when he looked at her like that. Long after the fundraiser ended, rain began falling softly across Charleston. Evelyn returned alone to her suite inside a restored historic in several blocks from the harbor. The room glowed with amber lamplight reflecting against antique mirrors while distant thunder rolled somewhere over the water outside. Exhaustion finally settled into her bones as she removed her earrings beside the window overlooking rain-covered streets below. Then she noticed the envelope resting neatly on the small marble table near the door. No name. No note. Just thick cream stationery sealed carefully beneath the hotel light. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside was the official funding approval for the waterfront restoration project. Full financing secured. Anonymous private backing. Her eyes moved immediately toward the signature line at the bottom. Blank. But the handwritten annotations beside the architectural notes stopped her breathing for half a second. Strong, precise lettering. Calm. Controlled. Identical to the handwriting she had seen earlier that afternoon across Adrian's briefing documents. Outside, rain slid slowly down the windows while Charleston disappeared into darkness beyond the harbor lights. Evelyn stood motionless in the center of the room holding the papers against her chest, suddenly realizing the most dangerous thing about Adrian Whitmore was not his power. It was how gently he used it around her. By early April, the distance between Evelyn and Daniel had become visible even inside rooms designed to hide uncomfortable truths. Manhattan entered spring beneath cold rain and pale skies while political season intensified around them with relentless elegance. Every week brought another gala, another donor dinner, another carefully photographed appearance where powerful people pretended not to notice the fractures quietly spreading beneath polished surfaces. But people always noticed eventually. Especially in elite circles where silence carried more meaning than arguments ever could. Evelyn returned from Charleston with something different inside her now. Confidence had not returned loudly. It arrived softly. In the way she carried herself through crowded rooms without apologizing for existing. In the way she no longer rushed to fill silence when Daniel ignored her. In the way she stopped shrinking her intelligence to protect his comfort. Daniel noticed the shift long before he understood it. The confrontation finally happened inside a private lounge overlooking San Francisco Bay during a high-profile political donor weekend. Rain drifted against the towering glass windows while expensive conversations echoed softly through the upper floors of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Evelyn stood near the bar reviewing restoration proposals on her tablet while city lights shimmered below through the storm outside. Daniel approached with controlled tension already visible beneath his expression. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. Evelyn lowered the tablet slowly. "Of course." He guided her toward a quieter corner near the balcony entrance where music from the ballroom faded into distant piano notes and rain against glass. For several seconds, he simply studied her face like he was searching for something he no longer recognized. Then finally he said it. "Are you trying to embarrass me with him?" Evelyn did not answer immediately. Beyond the windows, Ferries moved through dark water beneath silver fog while lightning flashed faintly somewhere beyond the harbor. With Adrian, Daniel added carefully. People are talking. Evelyn looked at him calmly, noticing how tired he suddenly seemed beneath the expensive suit and polished confidence. Not heartbroken. Threatened. That difference mattered. You stopped noticing me long before he did, she said softly. The words landed between them with devastating quiet. Daniel opened his mouth slightly, but no response came. Because somewhere beneath his pride, he knew she was telling the truth. A silence settled around them heavy enough that even nearby conversations seemed to blur into the background. Then Daniel straightened his posture again as footsteps approached from the ballroom. Political donors. Cameras. Important people watching. His expression returned instantly to controlled professionalism. But Evelyn saw something new in his eyes before he turned away. Fear. The rest of the weekend unfolded beneath growing social tension neither of them could fully escape anymore. Rumors spread quickly through donor circles after whispers emerged that Adrian Whitmore might withdraw funding from Daniel's upcoming expansion campaign. No one knew whether the rumors were true, but that hardly mattered. In elite society, perception often became reality long before facts arrived. At the rooftop gala Saturday evening, reporters gathered beneath white canopies while rain swept lightly across the skyline beyond the terrace. Camera flashes reflected against black marble floors and champagne glasses as wealthy guests moved through the event wrapped in designer coats and carefully managed smiles. Evelyn arrived alone after Daniel disappeared into private investor meetings. She wore a silver-gray gown that mirrored the storm clouds hanging above San Francisco Bay. Conversations shifted subtly as she crossed the rooftop terrace. People watched her differently now. Not with pity. Curiosity. Speculation. She sensed it immediately. Then Adrian appeared beside her near the railing overlooking the city. Dark rain traced slowly across his coat's shoulders while the skyline glowed behind him in blue and gold reflections. You should not stand out here alone, he said quietly. Evelyn looked toward the ballroom entrance where photographers continued scanning the crowd. Apparently I am not alone anymore, she answered. Adrian's gaze lingered on her for a second before drifting toward the reporters nearby. Several cameras immediately lifted toward them. The atmosphere changed almost instantly. Evelyn saw recognition pass through the crowd as whispers moved quietly between donors and journalists. Adrian Whitmore and Evelyn Carter standing together beneath the rain while Daniel Mercer remained somewhere unseen inside the ballroom. The story practically wrote itself. Neither of them moved away. That alone was enough to ignite speculation across the terrace. Later, after the gala reached full momentum, Evelyn escaped briefly onto a quieter balcony overlooking the harbor below. Rain covered the glass railing in silver streams while distant foghorns echoed softly through the night. The cold air steadied her breathing after hours beneath cameras and expectations. She did not hear Adrian approach until his voice appeared behind her. I keep trying to stay away from you. Evelyn turned slowly. He stood only a few feet away now, one hand resting against the balcony doorway while rain shimmered faintly through the dark hair falling across his forehead. There was no performance left in his expression anymore. No political caution. Just exhaustion beneath restraint. The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than any confession could have. For one impossible second, she almost stepped closer. Almost asked why he had stood at her grave in the life she remembered. Almost admitted she had been waiting for him to say something like this for weeks. Then the terrace doors suddenly opened behind them. Camera flashes exploded instantly across the balcony as reporters spilled outside searching for photographs away from the crowded ballroom. The moment shattered. Adrian stepped back automatically while Evelyn lowered her eyes against the harsh white light flooding across the rain. Questions rose immediately around them. Investors whispering. Reporters calling names. Somewhere inside the ballroom, Daniel turned toward the balcony just in time to see Adrian standing beside her beneath the storm. The rain over San Francisco did not stop for 3 days after the rooftop gala. Gray clouds pressed low against the skyline while political donors, investors, and journalists continued circulating rumors through hotel corridors and private dining rooms like smoke no one could fully escape. Everywhere Evelyn went now, conversations softened when she entered. People looked at her differently. Not as Daniel Mercer's elegant future wife standing politely beside power, but as the woman Adrian Whitmore could not seem to stay away from. That change unsettled the entire social circle around them more than anyone openly admitted. Daniel grew colder by the hour. Not cruel. Controlled. The kind of silence powerful men used when they feared losing control publicly. Evelyn recognized it because she had once mistaken that silence for strength. On Sunday evening, the final donor dinner of the weekend unfolded inside the Whitmore Grand Ballroom beneath enormous crystal chandeliers and towering windows overlooking the rain-soaked bay. Gold light reflected softly against marble floors while servers moved quietly between tables carrying wine glasses and polished silver trays. Political donors filled the room in dark tailored suits and evening gowns while cameras flashed near the entrance every few minutes. Evelyn arrived late after spending most of the afternoon alone in her suite trying to steady the growing pressure tightening inside her chest. She wore a black silk gown simple enough to avoid attention, but attention followed her anyway now. Especially when Adrian entered the ballroom moments later. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Evelyn felt it before she even looked up. Powerful people straightened. Conversations adjusted. Investors tracked his movements carefully while journalists repositioned themselves near the center aisle. Adrian crossed the ballroom calmly, exchanging brief greetings without lingering anywhere. Then his eyes found hers across the crowd. Daniel noticed it immediately from the head table. The dinner progressed slowly beneath layers of political performance and expensive tension. Donors discussed campaign numbers. Executives traded strategic alliances behind polished smiles. But Evelyn barely heard any of it anymore. The pressure inside the room felt suffocating. Every glance between her and Adrian became another rumor waiting to happen. Every silence beside Daniel felt heavier than the one before it. By the time dessert arrived, her pulse had become dangerously uneven beneath the calm expression she forced herself to maintain. Then came the final blow. One senior donor, half drunk on expensive wine and confidence, casually joked across the table about future political wives learning how to stay loyal during stressful campaigns. Laughter followed softly around the room. Not loud enough to create scandal. Just enough to humiliate quietly. Evelyn felt something inside her crack open beneath the weight of it all. She excused herself before anyone could stop her and walked quickly out of the ballroom into the quieter service corridors behind the hotel kitchens. The music faded behind heavy doors while cold fluorescent lighting replaced the warm gold glow of the gala. Her breathing became shallow almost instantly. She reached the private elevator hallway before her knees weakened beneath her. For several seconds, she simply sat there alone on the carpet beside the service elevator, pressing trembling fingers against her chest while tears blurred the marble floors beneath the harsh overhead lights. The panic felt terrifyingly familiar. Like the final months of the life she already lost. Like drowning silently while everyone kept applauding around her. Then footsteps approached. Calm. Unhurried. Adrian stopped several feet away the moment he saw her sitting against the wall. For the first time since meeting him, the composure in his face broke completely. He crossed the hallway immediately and lowered himself beside her without hesitation, one knee resting against the carpet while distant ballroom music echoed faintly through the walls. "Evelyn," he said softly. She shook her head once, unable to explain what was happening inside her. Adrian looked at her for one long second before speaking again, quieter this time. "You do not have to survive this alone anymore." Something inside her finally gave way at those words. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just quietly enough that the tears she had been holding back for years finally escaped. Adrian remained beside her through all of it without trying to fix her emotions or interrupt the silence. He simply stayed. And somehow that felt more intimate than comfort ever could have. The next morning, the storm over San Francisco intensified while reporters crowded outside the hotel entrance waiting for donor statements and political interviews. Black umbrellas filled the sidewalks while camera crews stood beneath heavy rain near the valet lane. Inside the lobby, advisors rushed around Daniel discussing emergency press schedules after rumors surrounding Adrian and Evelyn spread overnight through several major political blogs. "We need to control the optics immediately," one consultant whispered sharply. But when the elevators opened, every conversation stopped. Adrian stepped into the lobby beside Evelyn without speaking to anyone first. Investors waiting near the entrance looked visibly startled as he ignored the carefully arranged media route entirely. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, one executive reminded him nervously. Adrian never slowed his pace. "Reschedule it." The statement landed like a shockwave through the lobby. Then, in full view of cameras, donors, and political staff, Adrian walked beside Evelyn through the crowded press entrance instead of leaving through the protected private exit prepared for him. Camera flashes exploded instantly around them while reporters shouted questions through the rain. Adrian never acknowledged any of it. He remained close enough that Evelyn could feel the quiet steadiness of his presence shielding her from the chaos pressing in around them. For the first time, he chose her publicly. The black car waiting outside carried them silently through rain-covered streets while San Francisco blurred behind fogged windows. Exhaustion settled heavily through Evelyn's body now that adrenaline finally faded. She leaned back against the seat watching silver rain streak across the glass until her eyes slowly drifted closed. Somewhere during the drive, she fell asleep. Adrian noticed immediately. The city traffic slowed near an intersection crowded with paparazzi still following the hotel convoy. Flashbulbs erupted suddenly against the windows as photographers moved closer toward the vehicle. Without waking her, Adrian shifted quietly across the seat and raised one hand toward the glass, shielding her sleeping face from the cameras outside. His expression remained cold toward the reporters surrounding the car. But when he looked down at Evelyn resting peacefully against the seat beside him, something softer appeared there. Something dangerously close to devotion. The wedding rehearsal week arrived beneath cold coastal fog and relentless public attention. San Francisco glittered with expensive elegance while political blogs, donor circles, and society magazines continued feeding themselves with rumors surrounding Evelyn Carter and Adrian Whitmore. Every photograph from the donor weekend had spread faster than Daniel's campaign team could contain. Headlines called them unexpected allies. Others called them dangerous. Some simply called them inevitable. Evelyn tried not to read any of it, but silence had become impossible now. Everywhere she went, people watched her carefully. Waiting. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Saturday night inside the restored ballroom of the Whitmore Grand overlooking the bay. White roses arrived by the thousands. Gold chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors while event planners moved through the corridors carrying crystal centerpieces and carefully folded place cards for senators, investors, governors, and media executives. Everything looked beautiful enough to hide disaster. On Friday evening, rain drifted softly across the city while Evelyn stood alone beside the windows of her suite watching headlights move beneath the fog below. The engagement ring still rested cold against her hand. She had not removed it yet. Not because she wanted to keep it. Because removing it would make everything real. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Evelyn already knew who it was before she opened the door. Adrian stood outside in a dark charcoal coat still damp from the rain, his expression unreadable beneath the hallway lights. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them felt heavier now because too much already existed inside it. "You should be downstairs," Evelyn said softly. Adrian looked at her for a long second before answering. "I needed to see you first." The words settled low inside her chest. He stepped into the suite slowly while rain tapped gently against the windows overlooking the city. Everything about him felt restrained tonight. Careful. Like a man standing too close to something dangerous. "Tomorrow changes everything," Evelyn whispered. Adrian lowered his gaze briefly before meeting her eyes again. "If you walk away tomorrow," he said quietly, "I will walk with you." Her breathing caught almost imperceptibly. The city lights behind him blurred softly through the rain-covered glass while silence expanded around them. No one had ever offered her safety without asking for something in return. "You make it sound easy," she finally whispered back. Adrian's expression softened in a way she had never seen before. Not confident. Not powerful. Almost vulnerable. But before either of them could say anything else, his phone vibrated sharply in his pocket. Advisors. Schedules. Political emergencies. Reality returning too quickly. Adrian glanced at the screen without answering. Then he looked back at Evelyn one final time before leaving the suite quietly, carrying the unfinished moment with him into the hallway. Long before sunrise the next morning, Evelyn found herself unable to sleep. The hotel remained mostly silent while fog rolled thick across the bay outside. She wrapped a cream cashmere coat around her shoulders and walked alone through the empty upper corridors toward the ballroom where the rehearsal dinner would begin later that evening. The doors stood partially open beneath dim gold lighting. Inside, the ballroom looked almost surreal in the early morning silence. Endless rows of white roses lined the marble aisle while crystal chandeliers glowed faintly overhead like suspended stars. Tables waited untouched beneath silk linens and silver candle holders. Everything had already been prepared for a future she no longer believed in. Evelyn walked slowly toward the center of the ballroom. Her heels echoed softly against polished floors while fog-covered lights spilled through towering windows overlooking the harbor. Then, standing alone beneath the chandeliers, she finally reached for the engagement ring. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled it from her hand. The diamond caught the pale morning light one last time. Freedom sat only inches away now. But before she could lower the ring completely, footsteps echoed behind her. Daniel. He stopped several feet away beneath the silent chandeliers, his dark coat still damp from the morning fog outside. For the first time in months, he looked exhausted instead of polished. Human instead of political. Evelyn slowly closed her fingers around the ring without speaking. Daniel watched the movement carefully. "I knew you would come here," he said quietly. She turned toward him fully now. Neither of them moved closer. The ballroom itself felt like a living thing holding its breath around them. "Do you remember when we first saw this place?" Daniel asked softly. "You said it looked like something out of an old movie." Evelyn remembered. She remembered everything now. Including how lonely she had already been back then. Daniel stepped closer finally, though not close enough to touch her. "I think I loved you too late." The confession arrived without defense or arrogance. That somehow made it sadder. Evelyn felt something painful shift inside her chest because part of her believed him. He did love her now. Now that she had stopped disappearing. Now that someone else finally saw her value clearly enough to protect it. She opened her mouth slightly, almost ready to answer. Then another figure appeared quietly at the ballroom entrance. Adrian. He stood completely still beneath the doorway while soft morning lights spilled around him from the corridor behind. No interruption. No demand. No jealousy. Just silence. Daniel turned slowly toward him. And in that single quiet moment beneath the chandeliers, Daniel finally understood something irreversible. Evelyn was no longer standing between two men. She was standing between the life that destroyed her and the life that finally saw her clearly. By the time evening arrived over San Francisco, the Whitmore Grand Ballroom had transformed into something almost painfully beautiful. Thousands of white roses curved around marble staircases beneath towering crystal chandeliers while candlelight shimmered across polished floors like liquid gold. Beyond the massive windows overlooking the bay, rain drifted softly through blue fog and city lights blurred against the dark water below. Senators, investors, governors, and media executives filled the ballroom beneath the careful choreography of wealth and political elegance. Everywhere Evelyn looked, people smiled too perfectly. Spoke too carefully. Waiters moved silently through the crowd carrying champagne while string music floated beneath the low thunder outside. But beneath all of it, tension lived inside the room like electricity waiting for impact. Evelyn stood alone near the entrance balcony for several moments before the rehearsal dinner officially began. She wore a silk gown the color of midnight rain, simple enough to feel like herself instead of someone else's political ornament. The engagement ring no longer rested on her hand. That absence felt heavier than the diamond ever had. Across the ballroom, Daniel moved between donors with practiced composure, though his eyes kept searching for her between conversations. He looked exhausted now. Not from scandal. From realization. The kind that arrives too late to save anything. The ballroom coordinator finally stepped toward Evelyn quietly. "Miss Carter," she whispered. "They are ready to announce the couple." Evelyn looked out across the sea of wealthy faces and felt something extraordinary settle inside her. Calm. Not fear. Not anger. Clarity. She thought about the law office in Chicago. The divorce papers. The highway. The funeral she remembered without ever attending. And suddenly she understood something that changed everything. The second chance was never about saving the marriage. It was about saving herself before disappearing completely. Evelyn walked slowly toward the center of the ballroom while conversations softened around her. Daniel joined her beneath the chandeliers moments later, cameras immediately rising across the room in anticipation. The event host began speaking warmly about political futures and celebrated unions, but Evelyn barely heard him anymore. Her heartbeat remained steady now. She reached gently for the microphone before the introduction finished. Confusion flickered briefly across the room. Daniel turned toward her immediately. Evelyn looked out at the crowd quietly. Then she spoke. "I cannot marry someone who only learned my value after losing me." Silence crashed across the ballroom instantly. No music. No glasses clinking. Just stunned stillness beneath the chandeliers. Daniel stared at her as if the room itself had disappeared around them. Several donors exchanged shocked glances while cameras lifted higher from every direction. Yet Evelyn remained perfectly calm beneath the attention. No trembling. No apology. Just dignity. For one long moment, nobody moved. Then Adrian Whitmore began walking toward her through the silent ballroom. Slowly. Deliberately. Rain shimmered behind him through the towering windows while photographers rushed to reposition themselves around the marble staircase. Powerful men stepped aside instinctively as he crossed the room. He did not look toward the cameras. Did not acknowledge the whispers spreading through the crowd. His entire focus remained on Evelyn. Daniel watched him approach with the devastating understanding of a man finally realizing exactly when he lost everything. Adrian stopped beside Evelyn beneath the gold chandelier light. Not possessively. Protectively. The silence around them deepened almost painfully. Then Adrian spoke in the same calm voice he always used only with her. "She will not stand alone again." The statement was quiet. But it changed the entire room. Evelyn felt emotion rise suddenly in her chest so strong she almost looked away. Instead, she lifted her eyes toward Adrian and saw something there she had never fully allowed herself to believe before. Certainty. Not fascination. Not temporary desire. Choice. He had chosen her publicly in front of everyone who once overlooked her. And for the first time in years, Evelyn chose herself too. She reached for Adrian's hand slowly beneath the chandelier light while flashes exploded around them like distant lightning. His fingers closed around hers carefully, almost reverently. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, Daniel lowered his eyes in silent defeat. Not because Adrian had taken something from him. Because he finally understood what he failed to protect when he had the chance. Months later, autumn arrived along Boston Harbor in soft gold light and cold Atlantic wind. The historic waterfront hotel Evelyn restored now stood completely transformed beside the marina, its grand reopening attended by philanthropists, preservation leaders, and city officials from across the East Coast. Chandeliers glowed warmly through restored windows while jazz music drifted across the harbor terrace beneath strings of lights reflecting against dark water. Evelyn moved through the ballroom slowly greeting guests who now knew her by name instead of by association. The woman once ignored inside crowded rooms had become the center of them without ever raising her voice. Adrian remained nearby throughout the evening, never demanding attention yet somehow holding the entire room's respect effortlessly. Every now and then, Evelyn would catch him watching her with the same quiet intensity that first unsettled her months ago in Manhattan. Only now, she no longer looked away. Near the end of the evening, rain began falling softly across the harbor outside. Guests gathered near the ballroom windows watching reflections shimmer across the water while cameras captured the final moments of the reopening celebration. Evelyn stood beside one of the marble columns overlooking the city lights when she noticed Daniel across the ballroom for the first time all night. He stood alone near the entrance beneath the soft gold lighting, older somehow than she remembered. Not ruined. Just changed by regret in the way only late understanding can change a person. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded room. Daniel gave the smallest nod before quietly leaving into the rain without interrupting her happiness. Evelyn watched the doors close behind him and felt no anger left inside herself anymore. Only distance. Then Adrian stepped beside her beneath the chandelier light and gently reached for her hand beneath the table where no cameras could fully see. The gesture felt small. Intimate. Real. Evelyn looked toward him while rain traced silver patterns across the harbor windows behind them. "You are safe with me," Adrian said quietly. This time, she believed him. Outside, Boston shimmered beneath autumn rain while warm chandelier light reflected across the glass around them. And standing there beside the man who finally saw her clearly, Evelyn Carter realized the greatest revenge had never been making someone regret losing her. It was becoming a woman who no longer needed to beg to be loved at all.